to ask as many questions as you have. I believe Chris has turned on the Q&A panel. So at any point, anything jumps into your head, please feel free to punch your question in. Chris will see it and we can answer them accordingly. We'll also open up at the end for a few minutes for any questions you guys may have. And then per usual, we will post this recording to our website shortly after we complete today's webinar. So with that all being said, thank you one more time for joining us. I'm going to turn things over to Chris right now.
Thank you, Ryan, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for taking time to join us today for our Skype for Business webinar. Today, what I really want to focus on are some of the client changes, some of the different options for mobility, for our Mac environment, and how we're really going to make use of this in our mobile-first, cloud-first world, right? So for any of you who have heard Satya Nadella speak either at Ignite or Worldwide Partner Conference or any other events he's spoken at, right? Microsoft is a cloud-first, mobile-first world now. And how does Skype for Business fit into that model? And then how does that play into our internal IT strategies from a client perspective, from a mobility perspective? And then towards the end, we'll go over a roadmap of some of the new features and functions that we know are coming out in the cloud over the next 12 months and kind of discuss how those impact you as well. So again, as Ryan said, we've turned on the Q&A panel right beneath the presentation. You should see a Q&A icon, and you can go ahead and post any questions you have in there, and we'll make sure to get to them as they come in or as they are appropriate to be addressed. So when we think about the new Microsoft, we think about this new world. I've done a lot of presentations for various companies and customers over the past few months, really talking about this sort of new mindset within Microsoft since Satya took over, and the new direction for the company of this mobile-first, cloud-first world, and what that really means. And there's a phrase I've been using for a while now that I like to say, which is a slight variation on the one on the slide, is the right information to the right user at the right time, regardless of device. So not caring about which device the user's on, not caring about where they are, but getting them the data they need. And that applies not just to Skype for Business, but to SharePoint, to email, all of our line of business apps. We need to get users the data they need in order to get their jobs done. So when we think about that in the Skype for Business world, there's a plethora of updates that have come out for the client and for the back end that enable a lot of this stuff. So we're going to talk about the mobile world. We're going to talk about the traditional PC desktop world. We're going to talk about the new Mac clients and the changes on the Mac side. And for those of us who have been dealing with Link 2013 for years, there were some deficiencies in the Mac client. There were some issues with it and with that performance. And what have we done to address those and fix those? We're going to talk about Skype room systems, something else with the acronym SRS. I'm always helpful. I think there's about 30 different things right now in our world that have the acronym SRS. But Skype room systems, the update for the Link room systems. Talk about the traditional PBX telephony portion of it, as well as then VDI, web app, and then talk a little bit about Surface Hub and the modern devices that we can look forward to coming out. I don't have any HoloLens information yet, though. That's actually the one piece I am still missing, and I'm still waiting on is information on the client on HoloLens. For those of you who didn't see the Minecraft demo for HoloLens, I highly recommend you go check it out and look at what HoloLens can do inside of our environment. But at the E3 conference recently, Microsoft did a full demonstration of HoloLens with Minecraft, which was pretty impressive. So we'll look for more information on that over the coming months. When we think about that traditional desktop client, for those of us, again, used to Link 2013 or 2010, it's very similar to what we were used to before with the presence icons, with our pictures, right? And from 10 to 13, we swapped from words to pictures. It's all the same icons for that. You'll notice that the icons have gotten rounder as opposed to square. And that's more in line with Skype. So it's the Skype-inspired UI, I like to call it. It is still Link, or that link look and feel, but some Skype-inspired pieces that have come into it to allow some user transition. I joke about things like the noises, right? The bubbly noises, the bubbly ringtone, some of those new things that are there and present from Skype into the new client. Some of the biggest things, though, that have changed from a UI standpoint are the touch enablement as well. So if you think about the behavior of the Link 2013 app in previous applications, when you clicked on someone's name, it looked to start an IM with them as the default behavior. That was great in a PC mouse and keyboard world. In a touch-centric world, that doesn't work so well. Hover over doesn't work in a touch-centric world. So like one of the biggest changes in behavior we've noticed is when you click on an icon now, it does the click and lock. So it will pull up the menu to initiate a call. Best example of that is the call feature in Link 2013. When you clicked on the dial button, it default called the last number that you had with that person. Now when you click on that call icon, it actually pulls up the list of numbers. Again, thinking about that touch-centric world we're moving towards of I may not want to call you on the last one, and the hover over option doesn't work in a touch device. So some transitions in the client to make it more touch-friendly because we're moving more and more towards that touch-centric world. One of the other big things comes with the Office integrations, right? Easier transitions into sharing applications, PowerPoints, OneNote notebooks, taking some of that stuff we were already doing in Link 2013 and extending it, as well as integrating it into what's called the Office Mesh. If you're not familiar with the Office Mesh or Office Fabric, it is the back-end piece of Office 365 where everything's kind of aware of everything else. So that Skype for Business is even more aware now of things like rights management server, meaning if I have set securities and policies and controls on a document, marking it private or marking it as read-only, et cetera, that flows through all the applications, including Skype for Business, not allowing that particular PowerPoint to be screen shared, right? And not allowing it to be viewed by others. So just taking that and enhancing those features and functions from the other applications into the Office app. And we'll talk about the PSTN calling, parking, delegation. A lot of this existed in previous versions. We're going to talk about PSTN calling a lot as we get later on and we talk about the roadmap. But there's been a lot of improvements in the PSTN dialing and the codecs on the back end. And we'll save that, though, for a later slide. When we think about the mobile client and that mobile world, right, it's about getting that one look and feel across all devices so that the controls are optimized for the device you're on, but try and stay true to that one look and feel so that if I'm transitioning from my PC to my iPad to my Android phone, the controls are there. And really from the mobile client, we're looking to increase that video experience and the participant control. So enables the remote workers on an iPad or a phone to be able to view content, to be able to control content. I could do this whole webinar from my Windows mobile phone or from my iPad, connect in, have a headset connected to the device, and go ahead and do this entire presentation via that mode. So really that's the key, allowing anybody to join in securely and allowing that flexible settings in case people are on Wi-Fi data plan, so enhancing some of that experience of, hey, if I'm on Wi-Fi, perform this way, but if I'm on my data plan, perform this way. Do ring back and call me on my cellular line if I'm on my data plan or on my 3G, but if I'm on Wi-Fi, go ahead and do a VoIP-based call through my data connection, right, and have it automatically shift the behavior based on that on your modality at the time. The web application, which has always been there, again, just looking for some enhancements to allow gallery view, the whiteboarding, sharing of content, polling, annotations, all of those things so that the dial-in, dial-out conferencing, a lot of you may have joined through that method today. And again, full support for all browsers, Internet Explorer, Firefox, Chrome, and Safari. The one caveat to Chrome, Right now, it does work okay with Chrome. In Chrome's latest update, I'm not a web developer, but I know enough to be dangerous. There are a couple of different browser plugins that exist, or browser add-ins for websites out in the market. One are called NPAPI, one are called APAPI. APAPI are the newer ones, NPAPI are the older ones, and the latest version of Chrome and Chromium have decided to kill APAPI-based browser plugins. This is affecting a lot of things outside of Office 365 and Skype for Business. But the latest and greatest version of Chrome has had that problem. I know there was talks of Chrome going back on that because of the issues. It's sort of their way of trying to muscle the industry into only dealing with the newer browser plugins. We'll see how that goes, but there have been some issues with Chrome in its latest version due to that sort of issue, but hopefully it gets all sorted out. But everything up to the latest version works fine. There are some features of Office 365 that do have issues with Chrome. We'll talk a little bit about some other common troubleshooting issues and things I'm seeing as I deal with customers towards the end, again, as we talk about roadmap, but there are some other things to keep in mind that we'll draw attention to. Here's the big one, the Mac client. So Office 2016 has been announced and is due out this fall. That includes an update for Mac for 2016, so a new version of the Mac client for 2016. There were some known bugs and issues with the Link 2013 client for the Mac. The two biggest being the inability to do call recording and initiate a call recording, and the other one was the screen refresh rate when sharing your desktop, and the refresh rate or the paint rate, it looked like 1996. On some networks, it repainted very slowly, and you could your eye could perceive the screen repainting as people moved things around. And this was obviously a huge flaw, right, and a huge issue. Not every customer had the problem, but enough did that it was a fairly known issue. With the 2016 client, this has all been corrected, and you get that full rich experience, and we're looking more towards that Office parity between the two, and Microsoft's truly committed to that parity across devices as much as possible. There are always going to be things that we struggle with due to different operating systems, but Microsoft is really pushing towards that full parity, and Office 2016 for the Mac is going to move into that same direction that the rest of the Office suite and Windows 10 is moving, in the no more 3-year, or in this case 5 or 6-year release cycles. So Microsoft has really changed their mentality on how they want to do updates. We don't want to go 3 years between updates anymore, wait for huge service packs for feature releases, etc. As new features come available, we want to be able to push them out to the client as quickly as possible. And in fact, the way 2013 started this path and 2016 is going to continue it, is that we're going to see releases for the clients on sometimes a monthly basis. For Office, we're going to see updates come fast and furious. Now that immediately raises questions about SOX and compliance and control. You have the ability to stage, just like you would with WSUS or any other Windows update. You have the ability to stage and control these updates. The trick is they're going to be released fast and furious. You'll have the ability to test them, decide if they're good to go, put them through your normal process, but then roll them out. And that's really a mentality from the Windows OS through Skype for Business, through the rest of the Office suite, that Microsoft's really looking at. Get these updates out as quick as possible, get new features out to people. Purely from a training perspective, it's an advantage, because is it easier to teach users one new thing a month, or is it easier to teach them 20 things once a year or twice a year, right? And education majors in the crowd will obviously go and tell you that, it's easier to learn one new thing a month than 20 once a year, right? It's less a shock to the system, and it's easier to assimilate. And that's really the mentality for Microsoft moving forward. So thankfully, we're going to have a great new client experience and a new experience for the Mac, and we're also going to have that that ability to enable things like location for E911 and really get that experience up to snuff for them. Then we move into devices like the Surface Hub, which are a new kind of experience for your conference rooms and your collaboration spaces with inside of your organization, allowing people to brainstorm, create content in OneNote, using a whiteboard application. Think of this, in the scenario I always love to paint, think of your whiteboard in a conference room, and how many of us have ever walked into a conference room and there's a big do not erase on the whiteboard, right? And you can't use it because someone's taking it up, or how many people or how many applications exist for taking photos of a whiteboard to translate them back because we need to port this data. Think about the number of people who collaborate or work remotely in our organization now. How do we collaborate effectively? Well, it's video, and it's things like this where the person on the far side can be drawing on the whiteboard at the same time as the people in the room, and everybody collaborating together effectively. So that's really the mindset of the Surface Hub device, and then that environment, that content that you've created is associated to you, and you move from one room to another, that whiteboard can follow you, right? So it's not tied to a location, it's tied to a person, and that's really been a mentality in the Microsoft suite through 2013 and 2016 of really moving toward a user-centric mentality for all the applications, from System Center to application deployment and device management, through security concepts and rights management, through now this, where it's a person-centric mentality where we can have that information flow. And this becomes more important as we get distributed, because you take an organization like New Signature, where we are based all across the country. Teams are up and down the East Coast and connected. How do we collaborate together when I'm working from home, when I'm remote, or I'm working with a teammate in Virginia or DC, and how do we collaborate together effectively? Then we go into VDI, right? There are still a lot of companies and looking at that VDI-based infrastructure. And so we've looked for some enhancements on this side, allowing for some greater feature set and rich meeting experience for those people who are in a virtual desktop infrastructure. Some features are not supported by certain VDIs, and gallery view or call recording may not be enabled depending on how you're doing your virtual desktop infrastructure. If you're doing a virtual Zen desktop like experience where people don't have the ability to save files to a quote unquote C drive, or a virtual disk, things like call recording may not work. But if it's a true virtual desktop in the Microsoft sense, in a virtual PC environment, they would have those abilities because it's just a virtual PC that they're connecting to remotely. So it all depends on how you're doing your VDI, but Microsoft has taken a lot of time and energy into thinking about this. And it's a great way, the virtual desktop plugins for Skype is a great way to scale and get stuff out to different types of workers who are out there. So again, the real thought process here is around how do we scale, how do we get stuff out to people. When we're dealing with VDI, the typical thing we say is, we need to understand what your VDI environment's like, what it looks like, to be able to discuss the pros and cons within your particular environment based on the flavor of VDI you're running. Another area of massive change is the Skype room systems. So the Skype room systems are, when we think about Skype for Business and we compare it to, say, the Cisco world. In the Cisco world, we have Jabber for IM and presence. We have Call Manager for enterprise voice. And we have Tandberg for conference room systems, right? Those are three components. They're three separate products with three separate licensing agreements and three separate deployment methodologies that all kind of work together on the back end inside the Cisco world. Microsoft has taken a different track on this, and all of that functionality is baked into Skype for Business, whether it be the just simple IM and presence, communication and collaboration and workflow, through true enterprise telephony and through room systems. So these launched a couple of years ago now. They were originally called Link Room Systems or LRS, but now they're Skype Room Systems. They're made by Polycom, Crestron, and Smart. And they are put out to market, and they really come in different shapes and sizes and flavors depending on your room, right? And you can see in the photo a two-screen, 60-inch dual screen smart setup versus, there are smaller designs depending on that room. The real key here, and I'm often asked to compare Cisco and Microsoft on this level, or discuss, Cisco Link Room Systems versus, say, Lifesize or some other room system. And here's the key. Microsoft has a different design tack from a lot of these companies. Microsoft designs things from the user experience backwards. So they come up with what they want from a user experience standpoint and then figure out what the back end needs to be to accommodate that. Cisco builds things from the back end forward. They build things from the server room and the most efficient, tight setup on the back end and then figure out what can work on the front end. I'm not even arguing which one's better. They're just different. So from a Microsoft standpoint, they started with the UI they wanted. And one of the number one complaints people heard about conference room systems was their difficulty to use. Depending on what you had for a bridge on the back end, having to go in, dial an IP address, pound, 6-digit code, or things like that. To simplify it and be able to just do the 6-digit code, you had to buy a very expensive bridge for the back end or subscribe to something like a bridge service on the back end to provide that bridge for you, which had a decent expense to it. With Skype for Business, the room system is just another client. It's a native client that's on there that just connects back to the system, and there's no additional hardware or software on the Skype for Business infrastructure to support the device. It is just what it is. It's another client on the network. So from a back-end infrastructure standpoint, no extra cost, no extra licensing. It's just there. In addition, Microsoft has released something called the VIS, or Video Interoperability Server, which is designed to help with some 323-based integrations. Companies like Polycom have also introduced their own bridging technologies to help bridge the gap between traditional 323 room systems to Skype for Business. Because the real problem with SRS room systems is not the device itself or their ease of use. It has to do with sunk costs. For most organizations, you've already dumped tens of, if not hundreds, if not millions of dollars into your existing video infrastructure. And some percentage of it may be end of life, but typically most organizations, it all doesn't hit end of life at the same time. So it becomes difficult to replace without some interoperability between the two systems. Interoperability can sometimes, depending on how you do it, be expensive. Hence, Microsoft is attempting to bridge some of that with the Video Interoperability Server, which is a new product, a new server role to try and bridge that gap. But there are other solutions as well to at least get you through that transition period. If you don't have any sunk cost, then it becomes much easier just to do a bake-off and a comparison between Link or Skype for Business room systems, I should say, and other room system devices. And the real key here is the ease of use, that native calendar integration. To enter into a meeting for a Skype for Business room system is just as simple as walking up and touching the meeting, inviting the room to the meeting, and that appears on the calendar on the screen, and it's a simple act of touching it. And that feature alone is usually what wins over most executives in the simple ease of use, which will increase their adoption. There's a lot of organizations I go into who have sunk a lot of money into an existing room system, and it just doesn't get used often because it's too complex, it's too cumbersome. It takes 10 minutes to get the conference connected, and it just becomes difficult. And it's not always easy to engage remote or home-based workers. Whereas again, with Skype for Business, that's the whole idea, is combining that flexibility of all the in-room stuff and connecting it to people who are at home. When we think about Skype for Business as a traditional phone system or a PBX, for those people who aren't aware, Skype for Business is a full-fledged enterprise class IP phone system, has been for many years. A lot of people usually say, because they typically see people using Skype for Business with headsets or Bluetooth devices or things like that, and we get a lot of questions about phones, in particular desktop phones, and people asking, you know, can my users have a traditional phone if they want to? And the answer is yes. There are over 650 certified endpoints at this point for Skype for Business. There are many, many devices to fit different use cases, locations, things like common area phones versus boss admin scenarios, sidecars. And here's the trick with Skype for Business. You shouldn't need a sidecar because a sidecar is typically used for a boss admin scenario or a receptionist scenario. And the way the client works is multi-line appearance will just work through the client and let you know which line is ringing and you can answer it as such. But that's very different from the way traditional phone systems have worked where certain people are used to the sidecar, seeing the different lights light up when it's a different line. And that's where Microsoft several years ago kind of turned it over to the partner community and said, start building. And this is kind of, it's an example of that change in Microsoft culture over the past few years of the open API, or that open design concept to allow partners to create applications, to create devices that can connect people in. So there's a wide range of devices from Snome, Polycom, Plantronics, Jabra, Astra, HP, all sorts of different vendors for both what we call traditional phones as well as headsets as well as Bluetooth. Here's the one thing I will say with this, and this is just from doing hundreds of deployments at this point of enterprise voice for companies. Everybody goes into it thinking 90% of their user base is going to want a phone. What we've found over time is that far more users end up being comfortable with the headset. So even those organizations we've walked into, there was a large university that was transitioning about 5,000 users over to, at the time, Link, and now Skype for Business, for their user base, and they started going in saying they were going to buy about 4,500 phones and about 500 headsets. By the time the project was done, they did the first department, rolled them over to the new system, and of those 50 users, 48 of them wanted phones and 2 wanted headsets. By the time they were done with the second group, that first group had come back, and of those 48 users, 20 some odd of them wanted now headsets, and they wanted to hand back the phone and say, give me a headset because that's actually much cooler and much more useful as we're more mobile. So try not to go into it with a preconceived notion of what your users are going to want, because as you poll them, people are more comfortable with things than you think, and you really want to try and anticipate their needs, but you want to give them as much feedback as possible. So now we talked a lot about the different clients. Now let's talk about some of those individual features. When we think about some of those different use cases across the various devices, so we think about connecting with people everywhere, right? Being able to search and build that search of anywhere you are, finding out who you are, what's going on. That integrated contact card is still present that will give me detailed information into sort of your schedule, where you are, based on who I am and what you've given me access to. Right? Anyone can join and enjoy. That's the key, letting everybody connect from whatever device they are, but informing you of what that is. So really, when we're talking about going beyond the walls, it's connecting with people on Skype. Another common question we get is, by default, am I connected with everybody on consumer-based Skype or regular Skype, depending on what you want to call it? No, by default, you're not connected. But both on-premise and the cloud, if you want to connect to those people, you can. It's a simple checkbox to turn on to allow your users to connect with people on Skype or Skype for Business external to your company. And you can still have your security, your controls, your ethics, things like doing searches and preventing file transfer to go out through Skype, so that we can still do some DLP. And that's where that Office fabric comes into play too, where if I've done my rights management correctly, even if someone does attempt to circumvent and get a file out, and they're able to, if I've done my DLP correctly, because that document has now left my secure environment, rights management is immediately applied to it and locked down to it, and all of a sudden the file is password protected and locked down, where it wasn't when it was on the SharePoint site or it was on the file share. So again, we've got DLP now baked into a lot of these things just to prevent that information from leaving the organization. Designed and inspired by Skype, right? A lot of people have asked about the name change or asked about the change in some of the look and feel. And really the key is if we went to most CFOs or CEOs or people within the business a year ago and they weren't already using Link and we said the word Link, they'd go, what's that do? And the number of people who thought it was L-I-N-K, not L-Y-N-C, right? Just not understanding what it was. When I say Skype, there's 400 million plus users or whatever it is, 2 billion people have accounts. It's ridiculous. People know what Skype is. Even though the features and functions were the same across the two applications, it is that familiar and easy terminology and idea. The downside of that is people thinking it's looking at the consumer-based Skype and thinking it's the same thing. It's not. It's Skype for Business. So while it's designed and inspired by Skype, it has all the security and controls of Link 2013 plus all the new enhancements they've put in. So we still have all that security and control. It's just inspired by Skype, right? So that you can do the personal. And that's actually a big thing in our world today of that blending of home and business, right? The consumerization of IT. How do we blend that home and business? Why does everybody have an iPhone? Everyone has an iPhone. If the features you were looking for in your phone were calendar, mail, tasks, and the web browser, any device works. You could use a Windows mobile device, you could use an Android, you could use an iOS device, heck, you could use a BlackBerry. When we think about what else it can do, Clash of Clans, Angry Birds, right, music, iTunes, that's why people use the iOS devices so often, because of those applications. Microsoft gets that. So it's that blending of personal and home that Microsoft's really trying to achieve where applicable or allowed. Now we think about that rich meeting experience, and this is where we're really getting into some of those changes, where we can start doing some of that high-end, 1080p, 30 frames per second video from desktop and doing the video streams and sharing and content collaboration across. There is one flaw, though, with a lot of this mobility, and it's that increased security that we've been doing. And within the Microsoft world, Microsoft has accounted within their own security applications of how to account for Skype for Business, but in a secure model. There are a lot of applications, though, that are gaining in popularity that people don't take the time and think about the ramifications of some of the things they do. Blue Coat as a prime example. Blue Coat's a great piece of security software, does a lot to block traffic and does a lot to protect your network. However, Blue Coat by default blocks SIP, right? It blocks SIP streams. So when we think about collaborating and connecting with people externally or outside of our company, if someone's blocking SIP, well, then I can't do video with them unless they go actively unblock me. And I'm not saying this is a bad thing, but this is part of the deployment of Blue Coat or other pieces of security software that people don't take the time to think about. In a SaaS-based world, in a web or cloud-based world, we have to think about those various cloud applications that we would actually want to have access to our network and make sure we're accounting for them and thinking about them, and not just assuming the entire world uses what we use. So there's a lot of thought there that has to go into it. But the key is to really increase, regardless of the device, increase that ability for people to collaborate. Enterprise voice. Now this is where some of the most radical changes are going to take place over the next year. When we think about using Skype for Business as a phone system, right? Traditionally, when we looked at the two different ways of deploying Skype for Business, on-prem or in Office 365, there were two sort of gate checks for in the cloud or on-prem, and they both related around some form of voice. The first was integration. If I wanted to integrate Skype for Business into an on-premise based existing system, say a Polycom room system or a Polycom telephony system, I would need, or a Cisco telephony system, I would need to deploy that on-prem to do a SIP trunk connection between my Skype for Business environment and the third-party application. Because the way Office 365 is structured, to bring that SIP trunk into my Office 365 data center, well, I don't know exactly which data center I'm in. I'm in one of several in the US if I'm a US-based customer. So I'd have to bring SIP trunks into each and every data center, depending on where I'm running from at that given moment, in order to enable that SIP integration. That's just not practical on the scale of all of the customers in Office 365. What Microsoft is now doing, they are bringing the SIP trunks in themselves. So they are in process now of deploying all of these SIP trunks into their data centers to enable enterprise voice from the cloud. Now, what that's not going to do, however, is let you connect to every third-party system on-premise. Those on-premise applications have to somehow have a connection to the Microsoft data center. Polycom, as an example, is working on software in their environment that does in fact connect directly to Office 365, where some other vendors may not be. So how do we deal with that? Well, we have now the ability to do an actual hybrid solution where we can actually leave, just like we could with Exchange, have some infrastructure on-prem that can do our hybrid, do our connectivity to our on-prem applications while still leveraging some of the cloud features and functions. So more and more, that's becoming a viable option of something that wasn't necessarily there before. But the key is we're going to have that full enterprise PSTN calling capability in the cloud. We'll talk a little bit more about this in the roadmap slide I have coming up for timing, but this is a feature set that's coming. Other than that, we still have all of that traditional voice calling capability that we've had before. Find me, follow me, simultaneous ring, integrated networking, be able to do your dial plans, your DIDs or your extensions, just as you do them today. The bigger piece on the back end is the codec. So Skype used something called the Silk codec. There are different codecs you can use. I don't know everyone's technical level on the call. There are different codecs you can use, which are ways that we transmit voice and video over the wire to our clients and between each other. Link traditionally used something by default called RTA-RTV, real-time audio, real-time video, was Microsoft's proprietary codec. It also could use things like G711 and some other of the traditional standard codecs that have existed in telephony for quite some time. We're now introducing the Silk codec. And without getting into nitty-gritty details, the Silk codec is a lot better at open internet communications. It's a lot better at dealing with traffic and latency. It's a much stronger, more reliable codec. It allows for better communication. While remote video and remote audio codecs worked fantastic and were great codecs, the Silk codec is sort of that holy grail or that really fantastic codec that's going to allow an increased collaboration between all of our endpoints. So the codec on the back end is also getting a major update. Office integration. So now we start talking about really the value of the Microsoft suite, right? When we think about Skype for Business, and we think about that sort of Office mesh or the Office fabric on the back end and how everything is connected to each other, it's that seamless integration that really sets Microsoft apart. I've often said if I walk into an organization and they're running Lotus Notes for their email and they're using some third-party site collaboration tool and they want to deploy Skype for Business, they're going to struggle to find the value in it that others might, right? Not that it's not a good solution for them, but it's not going to work as well as those customers who are using SharePoint and using the Office applications for their day-to-day lives and environment. Because it's that back-end integration between Rights Management Server and SharePoint and Outlook and getting that presence indication and getting that enriched experience across all of the applications. Integrating with workflows within a SharePoint environment, being able to use presence or status or location as part of a workflow within a SharePoint environment, or that integration with OneNote of simply if I were to take notes from a call in OneNote, using the Skype for Business client, it does check-in, it does attendance, who was on the call, where did they join from, so that I can always go back and see who was in the call, right? It's that integration across the suite that is really key, and getting that across all of the various platforms. And this is where Microsoft has made great strides, particularly in Office 365, but even on-premise, for that integration and control. Now we come into really that modern enemy of mobility, and that's security. And really what we've done is increase the standards and the security protocols within the cloud as well as on-prem. So we can do our certificate-based security. We can do some manageability of the environment and who can do what. We can get very nitty-gritty with our policies and controls, integrate it with things like rights management server to prevent, to do some DLP, to do some rights management. They're baking that. When we think about things like e-discovery, when you think about the way e-discovery works in the Exchange / SharePoint / Skype for Business world now, if I'm archiving all of my IMs into the mail store, as is the default today with this from an archive capability for IM, now that integration with SharePoint into the Exchange, e-discovery, and legal hold tools, if you think about it, all of my mail, all of my asynchronous communication done through Exchange, all of my synchronous communication done through Skype, and all of my content and information in SharePoint is now all controlled through a single platform, through a single e-discovery tool. Then you do things like in the cloud of doing encryption in transit and encryption of rest, AES 256 encryption both at rest and in transit from Office 365, so I can secure all of the information going back and forth between my various clients and devices, enforce compliance, enforce security, and really gain control over that information. And really the key is set up one set of DLP rules, set up one set of rights management rules, and then have that flow from Exchange to SharePoint to Skype for Business, but only create it once and have them all leverage those rules. And that's really what the Office Fabric does on the back end, is I'll create one set of standards for security and control for content, and then flow that out to the various devices, people, or places, so that now I don't care that you're on the iPad. I'm going to do things like DLP compliance for anything that goes to or from that device. You then bake in a lot of the mobile device management and application isolation applications or controls within things like Office 365 or Intune. And we now have the ability to say, okay, I'm going to push out Skype for Business, the Outlook mail client, and OneDrive to your iPad so that you can open up attachments and Word and Office and all of that to your iPad. So you can open up all of those applications and things there, but I'm not going to push out something like Dropbox, so that if you open up a file from your email or if you receive something from within your Skype window, and save it to your OneDrive, that's fine. But if you try and save it to Dropbox, that's not going to be allowed because we've set up some controls and security that don't allow you to do that, that say that's not allowed. Disabling things like screen capture, disabling things like print screen or copy and paste through rights management so that people can't do these things. People can't take copies of that content as we're going through. Now we really talk about who you are, or the personas, and we think about the different work roles and people. And just to give you some examples of how people do it, so we think about that mobile worker, right? That person who's always at hotels or airports or in conference room. They need that reliable way to stay in touch with the rest of the company, to work where they are, to work how they need it to, so that they can still collaborate and connect with people regardless of their location. I fall into this category. I travel to New York. I'm up here in our Boston office, and I travel to New York every week, it seems like, for meetings and such, and being able to connect with people while I'm on the train or collaborate, or I am with people. A great example I give, I had a customer where we had to get some edits into a statement of work, and I was on the 6 a.m. train down, and I happened to be in the quiet car on the Acela, and one of my colleagues pinged me and said, hey, clients requested a change to this statement of work. Can you make the changes? Can I call you real quick? And I'm like, well, no, you can't call me. I'm on the quiet car, and I don't feel like getting up and going walking out while you tell me. Just IM me what you want or show me. Did a screen share, showed me what changes they wanted, showed me, kind of sent me some notes, said, okay, great. Worked on it while I was on the train, was able to ping that person before I got off the train in New York and say, hey, here's what's going on. And then as soon as I got to the Microsoft office and was done with my presentation, my status went back to available. They were able to grab me, hey, were you able to make the changes? Yes, here you go. And we got it out the door. Without something like Skype for Business, that would have been an email that I may or may not have seen, and I may not even have begun those changes until after my meeting. So we were able to get something out to a client 8 to 10 hours earlier than we might otherwise have gotten it out. And that can be the difference between winning and losing a deal. And that can draw a direct correlation to revenue inside your organization. This is just an example of how that mobile worker staying in touch can help. That work from home is another one where you really got that work-life balance, right? We're able to connect with people. We're able to use the devices we have. We're able to use your home network and through the codecs, but able to work on it and be able to do things like in-home conferencing. And one of the new features that we're going to look to see when we talk about the roadmap, with Windows 10 and the shift to Windows 10, an Xbox One is now going to be able to run any line of business app or any PC-based application because it's going to be running the same code that that your desktop is running at its core. So with that said, you'll be able to run things like Skype for Business on an Xbox. And I've often, with customers, painted this picture. Imagine a small conference room. For the in-home, there's the obvious advantage of having a nice 1080p camera connected to a dedicated video system in my living room that I could do conference calls from there. But even in a work environment, if we think about outfitting a 5 to 8 person conference room with a conferencing system, right? Even at their cheapest, a nice big screen, and then just USB for people to bring in their laptops if we want to have a dedicated device in there, we could be running a decent cost. Wouldn't it be great if we could just put an Xbox in there and use that as our basis for our conferencing with a nice 1080p camera, the Connect built into it? So again, some thoughts on how to use a consumer-grade product in the corporate world. When we think about that normal office worker, it's that everyday space and device. We're seeing whole companies who are built around the idea of new workspaces. I often like to ask customers the question of, is your office looking at sort of an office modernization project, right? The days of the cubicle farms are dying, right? Companies don't design offices anymore with that cubicle farm in mind, right? We're looking for that collaboration space. There are companies, Steelcase and others, who have built entire spaces built around Link and now Skype for Business, around collaborating together and how to work together as a team and being able to connect with others in the office easily and then take that information with you everywhere you go. So it's really about taking that, utilizing the spaces you have in your office. We think about that team lead, being able to, brainstorm or immediately collaborate with an entire group. There are several tools in the Microsoft stack for this. Yammer in an asynchronous fashion, but Skype for Business in that synchronous fashion. We think of like a persistent room. A lot of development companies I have needs for a constant always-on room. Wouldn't it be great if your help desk had an always-on room that they could go into and just share ideas and brainstorm and talk about things and collaborate together. So it's really about gaining insights from your employees and gaining insights from your team about what's going on and being able to do things like polling questions and try and get people's input who maybe aren't always comfortable speaking, but maybe are more comfortable typing and putting something in an IM. When we think about that executive, it's really about getting their information out, right? Getting out communication to people in a short, quick window, and sometimes video is a better way to do that. And when you combine stuff like Skype with Business with the video channel functionality in Office 365, being able to record a quick vision or a quick statement or a quick training or a welcome message and be able to get that vision out there. We at New Signature have a weekly staff meeting where our CEO or our president or various executives can get in front and sort of talk about a vision. Not everyone can make it. As we get larger as an organization, it's hard for people's schedules and time zones to all make it. We're able to record that meeting and publish it. Think of recording what we're doing today and people who couldn't attend this webinar and being able to make that available to others. So combining that, sort of Office 365 video session with being able to get out quick bits of information or concise communications to your team, which are sometimes better done over voice or video and not necessarily email. Email is the most overused and overabused tool. People treat it like a real-time communication tool, but it actually is a very poor communication tool because all of the nonverbal communication, all of the tone, inflection, body language, none of that really comes through. And so being able to do it in that standpoint can be a really valuable resource for executives to get out their information to their employees quickly. And then when we think about the world, right, customers, partner, the world at large, family, my son is now on Skype so that when I do travel for business, he is on Skype and can IM me, ask me questions about homework, ask me about things so that as I'm traveling or if I'm busy, he can still get a hold of me in a quick, easy way in that mobile or web-based world, being able to connect with people outside our organization and stay in touch with them as a partner or as a customer. My favorite customers are the ones who I've deployed Skype for Business for, and we both have federated with each other, and they can just IM me when they have a question or see I'm available and say, hey, Chris, do you have 2 seconds to answer this question for me? I can give them great customer service because they can see I'm available and just ask me a question instead of emailing me and waiting for me to respond. All right, in the last few minutes here, sort of a timeline, sort of what's coming. So the Skype for Business clients all pushed out May 1st to organizations, as well as the Skype for Business server bits for on-premise pushed out May 1st as well. So Skype for Business is now you can fully deploy it on-prem, and they're in process of upgrading all the tenants in the cloud bit by bit to Skype for Business on the back end in the cloud. The good thing is the clients are backwards compatible. You can use a 2013 client to connect to Skype for Business. You can use a Skype for Business client to connect back to 2013 or 2010. So it's all backwards compatible. So you don't really have to, there's no prereqs for deploying one versus the other in an order. What's going to come next is that hybrid meeting solution or that hybrid conferencing. So as I said, Microsoft's going to bring these SIP trunks into their data centers. And traditionally in Office 365 today, if you wanted to do conferencing, PSTN-based conferencing, you would need to connect to someone like an Intercall or a Global Crossing to provide that conferencing bridge in the cloud. Moving forward, Microsoft is going to be offering that solution on their own. And they're going to be bringing that out so that you can be doing broadcast meetings and you can be doing various conferences in the cloud. They're also going to give you the ability to record directly to things like Office 365 when you're doing that, being able to put them immediately into your video channel if you've got an Office 365 client and not just record it and have it come locally and then have to upload it later. Later this year / early next year, so December, January timeframe, Microsoft's going to be enabling enterprise voice in the cloud. So PSTN dialing, doing your DIDs, doing your whole call plan in the cloud. It's going to come to the US first, and then it's going to come to Europe next, and then to Asia Pac after that. If you understand how Office 365 is situated, that's the 3 pools of data centers. And if you're a US-based company, you sign up with a US-based address for your Office 365, you're homed in the US, and that's where your data centers are. So again, US is going to come first, then Europe, and then beyond. What we don't know right now is, because it's SIP trunks, we should be able to offer international DIDs, but that level of detail is just not out yet. We're going to look for more of that information on pricing for that service, as well as when we'll be able to do DIDs. Even if you're an international company, can you do it in the US data centers but have international DIDs? When's going to be the timing of that? So we'll see that all come out over the next few months through the September timeframe. But we're really looking at Q1, late Q4, early Q1 of the calendar year for that to roll out. And then Skype for Business Cloud first, really where it's 100% parity with on-prem, global support for everything, and we're saying you don't need to do hybrid, and it's fully 100% parity mid next year, right? At least for the U.S. data centers, and then going global as it rolls out. So that's really our roadmap for the next few years, particularly for the cloud. For on-prem, it's there, it's deployed, it's out, you can do it. For on-prem deployments, it's great, but we've got this awful middle ground we're in now, where we've all spent years hearing from not just Microsoft but multiple companies of the cloud is where it's at and to move things to the cloud. But in reality, that's not always an option, as the case of enterprise voice today. So what does that mean for your deployment strategy? Where are you? If you've got no Office 365, no link server, and I'll add in the caveat, no pending need for a PBX replacement today, start in Office 365. Go to Office 365, run all your meetings up there, get used to it, and then prepare to migrate your PBX to the cloud when it's ready, and don't bother with on-prem. Where that falls down is, I've had a couple of customers who have had, my PBX is end of life in August, and I need to replace it because I'm not willing to run for 6 months on a PBX that's end of life. That's a risk factor I'm just not willing to take. In which case, we need to do on-prem now. We need to migrate to on-prem now, do EV on-prem now, and then migrate you to the cloud when it's ready, if you want to go that way. If you're in Office 365 only there today, and again, it all boils down to where your voice needs are today. If you have that overwhelming need for enterprise voice, I need a new PBX, and I need it now. That's where we're still going to be on-prem for today. If you're running Link Server on-prem, you may consider just doing the upgrade and then looking at hybrid. And again, depending on where you are, if you're Link Server on-prem today, but just IAM and presence, you should migrate to the cloud, and that's a pretty easy transition. But again, if you're doing EV, that's where we need to really look at. And again, when we talk about all workloads, again, you're going to stay on-prem for now, and that's where you're going to look at as time moves on with the hybrid and then migrating to the cloud. So it really does all boil down to where your PBX is today, what's your desire to replace it, and where you're at. The good news is the way Office 365 licensing works, that even when you buy the Office 365 licenses with the E4 SKU and you choose to transition to the cloud, you can do so, but still run Skype for Business on-premise, and that license covers you for running Skype for Business on-premise, at least from a user standpoint. So the licensing, Microsoft's made it easy for that transition and migration back and forth with this on-prem and in the cloud. But this is the area where I spend a lot of time talking with customers. So as we wrap up, no matter who the client, no matter what device, Microsoft has the solution to cover that device, cover that user scenario. Skype for Business is really built around this mindset. And then when we think about the cloud and on-premise, it's really a case of where you're at in company to company, where you're at, where we can hopefully help guide you through some very basic questions that will help us guide you to where you're at. Unfortunately, it may lead to some hard decisions. I've had a couple of customers already where I really need to do PBX, but I don't want to do anything on-prem, and that's where you've got to make that decision, and we've got to, those are the situations that are the most difficult, and we really have to do a lot of analysis on timing and everything else and how to make this work for you. With that, I definitely encourage you to reach out to us and feel free to connect with us as you start dealing with these on your own, as you start thinking about these issues on your own. I'm available. We have a whole Skype for Business team to hop on a call with you and talk about the particulars of your individual company and give you an individual deep dive into what your roadmap as an individual organization would look like, and how you would get from point A to what your ultimate point B is, and what that process and transition would look like. But I want to thank you all for taking the time today and joining us. And if there are any questions, I'm going to hang around. Please post them in the Q&A. I'm going to check that now and answer that, and then we'll take it from there.
Chris, while you are checking the Q&A section, I'm going to stop recording. And just to kind of echo what Chris was just saying, if anyone has any questions or would like to speak with us, any kind of follow-up, you can always reach us at info@newsignature, or you can just jump directly to our website. Very easy to contact us directly through their website as well. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us with any questions, thoughts you guys may have.